25 signatures. 5 of the folks declined to sign. Now, normally, like when you read a Supreme Court decision, they'll say the decision is 7-2. You get a majority report and a minority report. The people who don't agree give an additional report. What the Common Core folks did was they just removed the names of anybody who didn't sign. Their comments weren't included, their concerns weren't included, their questions weren't included. Their names were just stripped from the document, so it looked like it was unanimous, except that it wasn't. Now, 3 of the 5 have never gone public, and so nobody says their names because you should respect people's privacy if they want to be private. 2 of the 5 have been very public. One is Dr. Sandra Stotsky, who actually is from Massachusetts, who is an ELA person, and the other is Dr. Jim Milgram, who taught math at Stanford University for 40 years. And they have both been very public in their concerns and critiques about the process and the standards and how poorly they were written and how they didn't receive any of the information that they asked for as a member of the committee. If you look at the Common Core website, and this is the Common Core website, the standards are copyrighted, which means nobody can change them. You get a license to use them, and the National Governors Association Center and the Council for Chief State School Officers are the sole owners and developers, unless a state uses them, and then a state doesn't have to tell anybody that they were in fact developed by these 2 private nonprofit organizations. So for example, when I was in Tennessee, a state senator asked one of the representatives of the Common Core folks, well, can we in Tennessee change the standards? What if we don't like one? Can we erase it? Can we get rid of it? And the guy said, well, you can add up to 15%. And the senator said, so the answer is no. We have to buy the whole thing. Yeah, you have to buy the whole thing. But the website has more information. Did you ever buy a car? You all came here in a car, so I'm assuming you've all purchased a car. You can go to the dealer, and you can buy that brand new car, the one that comes with a 100,000 mile, 10-year manufacturer's warranty, bumper to bumper. It's wonderful. Maybe you can't afford that. So you buy the gently used car, the last year's car that the dealer drove all around, and you get the balance of the manufacturer's warranty? Well, maybe you can't afford that. So you go to a dealer and you buy one that has the dealer's warranty, 30 days, 90 days, 120 days, might be the transmission, the motor, the chassis. Or you buy the oldest, most dilapidated car. My youngest son is a junior in college, and last summer, with great pride, he bought his very first car for $850. So of course you know what the sticker said on the window. It said, as is. In other words, as soon as you sign it, it's your problem. Even if you can't get it off the lot, we don't really care about this. Which is probably how most of us bought our first cars. The Common Core website says that the Common Core standards are offered as is. It goes on to say that the developers of the standards assume no liability whatsoever for any harm that comes because of the use of the standards. And in fact, any licensee, that would be a state, they waive the right to seek any redress. So the developers of these standards do not stand behind them, even to the extent that Sears stands behind a power saw. That's very concerning. While the standards were being written, people started to complain. This was from the Washington Post, and this was written by 2 early childhood experts. And they looked at the folks writing the standards and said, none of these people is a K-12 early childhood educator. They went on to say, draft copies started to come out, and some of these folks said, it doesn't look like the people who wrote these have any knowledge whatsoever about how little ones learn. These are not research-based. This is how a research-based project goes. I put this together, and I say, you shouldn't sit in the front, I'm going to use you as an example all day. And I say, okay, so I'm going to give you a copy, and I want you to test them, and I'm going to give you a copy, and I'm going to give you a copy. And then I come back in 6 weeks or 6 months, and I say, did you like it? What worked? What didn't work? What comments, what suggestions do you have? And then I incorporate those. And then I go back again and say, okay, I incorporated some of the suggestions. What do you think? And maybe the second time I talk to you and you and you, so that I get different varieties. It's called a beta cycle. You know, one of my sons is a computer engineer. When they develop a game, it's the beta. The first one is the beta, and they put it out and you can test it. And he's a computer engineer, so he's into that kind of stuff because he's kind of geeky. And so he does all those beta copies. But in research, that's how it works. If I want a new program, I test it first to see if it works and get feedback. But they didn't do that. They developed them in secret and then plunked them into the marketplace as is. So by definition, they can't be research-based because they did not do any research. They said they got 10,000 public comments. They published 24 out of 10,000. They did not publish a statement that was signed by more than 500 early childhood professionals, including teachers and child psychologists and pediatricians and researchers opposing the Common Core standards. And the statement said that the over 500 signers had grave concerns about the core standards for young children. The standards conflict with new research in cognitive science, in neuroscience, in child development, and in early childhood education about how young children learn, about how to teach them, and about what they need to learn. Among the signers were the 3 past presidents of the National Association for the Education of Young Children, which is considered the foremost authority on early childhood education in America today. 11 copies of it were hand-delivered to the writers. They were ignored. And when the standards came out, Dr. Carla Harwitz, who was from Yale, said many of the most experienced young teachers of young children, they're just quitting. Because she said these standards will harm children, and these teachers didn't want to be involved in it. Well, was her prediction true? This is from New York. Mary Calamia is a licensed clinical social worker. She's been providing psychotherapy since 1995 in New York schools. She didn't know anything about Common Core. But by 2013, she was testifying in front of the New York House and Senate Education Committees about the topic. Because she said she started to get phone calls from school districts, especially honor students, who were self-mutilating because of the pressure of what's happening in these classrooms. She said she got calls from little kids who were refusing to go to school. They said they felt stupid, school was too hard, they were having tantrums. As test time came, everything got worse. Teachers were upset. One child was even suicidal. Now I will tell you, I was in New York and giving this presentation, and a mother that I didn't know in the audience shared afterward that while her child wasn't that child, her child was also that way because of the pressure. Her child had been a high-achieving child and just couldn't figure out what was wrong and didn't know what to do with it. In one audience, as I was walking through this, a lady in the back said, yeah, her kid pulled out her own eyelashes from the stress. Mary went on to say, you can't change biology. Common Core calls for kids to do things that they physically cannot do. All of our children develop at different rates, but the stages are basically the same. We'll ignore babies. First, you are pre-operational. And in pre-operational, what you see is what it is. So if I take 4 M&Ms and I put them in a line, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I take 4 M&Ms and I go 1, 2, 3, 4. And I say, is that the same? You would say yes. But a pre-operational child would say no. Because if it doesn't look the same, it can't be the same. And children are pre-operational, some of them up until they're about 7. So now we have kindergarten children being asked to critically think. And they're pre-operational, which makes them normal developmentally. But we're not measuring them anymore against developmental normality. We're measuring them against standards that are developmentally inappropriate, and then we're telling them and their parents, little Johnny is delayed. Little Johnny is not delayed. But the other thing that little ones can't do is evaluate the grown-up. So if the grown-up says, you should be able to do this, the little one thinks, I should be able to do this. Because, you know, little ones, there's God, there's the grown-up. Like, there's not really all that much of a difference between what they think you can do as a grown-up and what they think God can do. Because they're little. And you can do all these magical things that they can't do. So if you say they should be able to, they believe you. And when they can't, the only place that they have to go is to say, I'm stupid. You teach a 5-year-old that he's stupid, he'll believe it for the rest of his life. Because they don't have any defenses. And it's happening everywhere. Little ones self-defining. I was at a conference in the West. A little 9-year-old sort of attached herself to my hip. She was my helper for the night, and she worked the computer and she handed out papers and she was adorable. And she's chatting away at me and she told me how she liked to read, and I said, oh, okay, and what have you read? Well, she read A Wrinkle in Time. You're 9 and you've read A Wrinkle in Time? So did you like Mrs. Who or Mrs. Which or Mrs. Whatsit, which are 3 of the main characters? Well, not only could she pick one, she knew why. So she actually had read the book and did understand it. That book is not written at the level for 9-year-olds, it's higher level. And at the end she came up to me and she said, Dr. Luksik, I really hope that you succeed because then I won't be dumb in math anymore. And she said it the way that I would say today's Saturday. I said, honey, who told you you were dumb? I can't do it. My mom even got a tutor and I still can't do it. So now that's in her head. Well, see, when you ask them to do things they aren't ready to do, they don't have any place to go but to say, it's me. I'm the one that is the failure. I'm the one who's incapable. What you hear is, well, it's because they're more rigorous. That's poppycock, to be polite. These standards, and we'll use math as an example first, they don't raise the level of the kind of information they're supposed to learn. They unnecessarily complicate the way that we present the information to them. So let me give you an example. Here's the problem, 17 plus 15. You would write, here you go, 17, 15, 7 and 5 is 12, put down 2, carry the 1, 1, 2, 3. We tell them, add from the left. Now, I will tell you, I've taught math up to and including calculus. I actually do add from the left, a lot. And if you talk to engineers, because what you do is you pull out all the 10s, and then you look at what's left. But I can do that because I understand how all those things fit together, and I'm not 7. I'm just a tad older. When you teach a concept, the appropriate way to teach a concept is you teach it in the simplest and most direct manner that is most designed to give you the most success most of the time. That's why we taught them the standard algorithm. Because it is the simplest, most direct way to teach it. It is designed to ensure success most of the time. And we made sure that they mastered it. I did a debate and I said, well, yeah, we taught them to carry 1, but nobody ever told them why. Well, that's poppycock too. Of course you knew why you were carrying the 1. You remember you had the little blocks and then you had the little stick, and you took the little blocks and you put them on, and if you filled the stick, you actually picked up the stick and you carried it into the next column. Because we took an abstract concept and we made it concrete, because they were concrete thinkers. And then remember the book had the line between the columns, and you wrote down, so 7 and 5 is 12, 7 and 5 is 12, you wrote down the 2, the 1 went over here, oh look, it's in the other column, which is the tens column, and it had labels on the top. Of course we taught them why. But we made sure they mastered how. Now you hear, we want them to be fluent. That's a meaningless word in pedagogy. It's absolutely meaningless. What we used to do was we made them automatic. What does that mean? If I say, what time is it, you're all going to glance at your watch and a time is going to pop into your head, and you will be continuing to listen to me while that time pops into your head. You did 7 things. I know, I've taught kids how to tell time. The first time I did it, it was like, wow, this is really complicated. There's a lot here that I didn't realize. Because it's automatic. Well, see, the reason we taught math facts, whether they were addition or multiplication, was we made them automatic. So that when you did get to algebra 2 or trig or calc, and you got to 7 times 8, you didn't have to write 7 rows of 8 sticks and count them. We wanted 56 to pop in your head without you having to think about it at all. And because they were pre-operational or concrete thinkers, we taught it the way that their minds could learn it so they were successful. Now they weren't dumb. They were smart. I can do this. Self-image. Common Core doesn't change, it doesn't make things more advanced. It just complicates any task that we teach them. So instead of giving them power and success and the ability to move forward, we plunge them into a morass of confusion where we say, we're going to teach you 5 ways to do it before they've learned any of them, and all they do is mush all 5 up in their heads. And now they can't do any of them at all. Which is why they're behaving the way they're behaving. In English, going back to our clinical psychologist, clinical social worker, we're asking them to write critically, telling them to persuade. But see, they don't have a prefrontal cortex. So the only way that they can persuade is to tap into the basic emotions, like fear and anger. And then we wonder why they act out. They don't have the ability, because they can't see things from another point of view yet. You know, 6-year-olds, if I'm having corn, so is everybody else. They can't see things from another worldview. They only have their own. So how can you intelligently persuade someone if you can't figure out where they're standing? Well, then all you can do is be angry or try to make them afraid. So what we're doing is we're pulling out emotions that they can't handle and confusing them and asking them to do things they can't do and then telling them that they are failures because the system is broken. So were the child development experts correct? Mm-hmm. Yes, in fact, they were. They were correct. Now let's move to how the government is involved. This is President Clinton. Remember we did Bush the Elder and then Bush the Elder, Clinton, Bush the Junior. This is President Obama. When he came in, one of the very first things he did was the stimulus fund, remember the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Inside that was a $53.6 billion appropriation to the Department of Education. It was called the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. Race to the top was just one little piece of that bigger pie. In order to get stabilization money, the states had to say that they would move toward these college and career-ready standards and that they would establish a pre-K to college and career data system. It was called a P through 20 system. The states had to sign what was called an assurances page. When the federal government really wants you to do something, they tell the states, just sign this page so the language is exactly what the federal government wants it to be. I know I've read thousands of these kinds of grants in my lifetime, and that way the states can't do airy-fairy language. They're sure, this is what we want and this is what you have to do. In the database, the states had to say that they would establish one and that it would include all of the elements that were mandated by a federal law called the America Competes Act. The feds even had training sessions for the states on how to implement that data system. And what they said was it had to connect early childhood, post-secondary, and labor data. So it follows you out of school, into college, and into the workforce. It connects teachers and students. The data had to be accessible to the research community and public stakeholders. And you've probably heard, if you've done this at all, about FERPA, the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, which was federal legislation designed to protect the privacy of student data. In 2011-ish, the Department of Education rewrote the regulations interpreting and implementing that, saying that anyone who has a legitimate educational interest, and that includes vendors, can have access to the data, and that parental consent is no longer required to do that. The data had to be able to cross state lines and be used at all levels of education. The elements included, number 1 and number 7, was enrollment information and transcript information. Now that sounds pretty innocuous until you think about all the things you tell the school when you enroll your child. They know your family structure, they know who they live with, they may know your financial situation if you're applying for school lunches. They have health care records. Transcript information includes not just classes, but discipline information. So maybe you heard about the little one a year ago who ate a Pop-Tart and decided the Pop-Tart looked like a gun, and the teacher suspended the child for making terroristic threats. He was 7. It was a Pop-Tart. But his record says terroristic threats, because it's such a dangerous Pop-Tart. In Texas this year, a 9-year-old was evidently having a little spat with another 9-year-old in the recess yard, and the first little one had seen the Hobbit movie. So he said to the second one, well, I have the one ring, and I'm going to make you disappear forever. He really didn't have the one ring. It was pretend. suspended him for making terroristic threats. And the father went down to the school and said, you get there isn't a one ring, right? Like, he really couldn't make the other kid vanish. That wasn't really true. It was two little boys, and the school in the press said, we're protecting all of our children from threats, magical or otherwise. Well, that's ridiculous. Except his discipline record has a suspension for terroristic threats. And when, in both cases, the parents got involved to say, we want that expunged from our child's record, all of a sudden the schools said, well, really, he's been a discipline problem for a long time. And so we can't take it away. Because this was just the culmination. Of course, that didn't come out until after the fact. But now that's on his record. So now it's not so innocuous anymore. State assessment scores, every child has an identifying number. We can share data from preschool through college. It was called a P through 20. P was preschool, K through 12 is what you think. 13, 14, 15, and 16 is college. 17, 18, 19, and 20 is the workforce. So it follows you forever. Originally there was the K through 12 system. This was this box. Then we added post-secondary and early education data, and with the stimulus money, the bigger box. So we added labor data, your financial records, and your health records. Tennessee actually calls it the 360-degree view of the child. Data from all different agencies is put together. So has your family been involved with child protective services or mental health, or is there a criminal justice issue in your family? All of that becomes part of the same data system. Rhode Island got about $135 million in stabilization money. So creating this data system was a requirement to get the money. And you did. So you did. You did several interactions with the federal government. This is your Race to the Top grant application. This is your Phase 2 application. It's dated May of 2010. Like all states, you reached for the carrot of Race to the Top. The Common Core state standards in final form weren't published until June of 2010. So a month before anybody saw them, your state promised to implement them. It's kind of the perfect pig in a poke story. That's not responsible. Every school child, public school child in the state of Rhode Island, was to be using standards that your government had not yet seen, and neither had anyone else, because they weren't published until June of 2010. Additionally, your state tried to get out of the requirements of No Child Left Behind. Remember we talked about that 100% proficiency? As that 2014 date got closer, the states started panicking and going to the federal government and saying, we're not going to make it. We're not going to get to 100%. So the Fed said, okay, you can get a waiver as long as you buy into our policies. Now it's called an ESEA waiver, and here's where yours says an ESEA, because remember, No Child Left Behind was a continuation of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is where those letters come from. And your application, this one was dated in May of 2014. The latest update is October of 2014, but they didn't really change the language inside it. You just have to renew it periodically. So you did both. You reached for the carrot of the money of Race to the Top, and you tried to avoid the stick of No Child Left Behind. Both things required you to adopt the Common Core standards, and both required you to implement the databases. As part of that, you joined the PARCC consortium, and here's the 13 states that are currently in PARCC. A lot of them have pulled out. It used to be over 20, so a bunch of states, including mine, pulled out, but Rhode Island, and here you are, you're still a member of this Partnership for the Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, saying that you would implement the PARCC test. PARCC is its own organization. They signed an agreement with the U.S. Department of Education, and here's the agreement that they signed. And in that agreement, they said that they would develop a strategy to make student-level data that result from the assessment system available for research for linking, validity, and program improvement, and they would produce the student level data in a manner consistent with industry-recognized interoperability. So when you joined PARCC, you promised you would give PARCC, because the kids are taking the PARCC test, all the data goes to PARCC. And PARCC said they would give the data to the federal government. And no parent is involved in that process. At no point does it say your consent is needed or required, or that you even know what data is collected and transmitted. And then FERPA says, the new regulations, anyone with a legitimate educational interest, including vendors, can have access to the student level data. Additionally, this is from the United States Department of Labor. This is the Workforce Development Quality Initiative, and they are going to use the education database and link them to the workforce data, so that the data systems now will follow individuals through school and into and through their work life. What are the objectives? They're going to match workforce data with education data to create a longitudinal data system with individual level information, beginning with pre-kindergarten through post-secondary schooling, through entry and sustained participation in the workforce and employment services system. It's a lifelong tracking. And Rhode Island, here's how the awards go. Rhode Island, and there you are, little blue, you were round 2 funding receiver. So do you participate in this? Yes, you do. You received $1 million in that round of funding. Now this is actually from Massachusetts, but just to give you an idea, it just came out last week. Tewksbury is a school district in Massachusetts. They were having a conversation about how much money was spent for special needs children who needed out-of-district placement. And the schools committee somehow managed to release data so that the public was online, so the public could see it. Not only did it give information about the children, which it did, to the point, it didn't have the kids' names, but even the local paper said they could find, they knew which kids were which, but it ranked the parents as cooperative or uncooperative on a scale of 1 through 3. The rankings were made public as well. This is actually the local paper, and they talked about their shortfall, and there's been a huge backlash. Most parents didn't know that their cooperativeness was being rated in the database by the school district. And remember, these elements, does they have to cross state lines? Yeah, it can't happen in Rhode Island. The only way that the data can cross state lines is if everybody's using the same data points. Because otherwise, if you've ever done any programming, if it doesn't match, it can't cross. And the local paper said the paper could identify 7 families in the list, and was contacted by others based on the material in the sheet. So when they say, well, we just won't give them the identifying number, or we won't give them the name, right? Because if you know what school they go to and what grade they're in and what teacher they have and what street they live on, you can't find that kid. And this is just one example. When I was in Minnesota, a parent stood up, and I actually had it in an email from her as well, that she went to look at her own child's profile, except she wasn't. She was looking at somebody else's profile, because the district had mixed them all up. And so everybody was looking at somebody else's confidential information in the database. So it's not just what they're collecting, it's that they can't protect it either. Additionally, we're back to the reform page, the assurance page. You said that you would implement the standards. And again, the federal government had training sessions. And the first thing that they said is these are cradle to career education plans. So it's no longer K through 12 education, where we are educating the child to be the person that that child was created to be, to open doors of opportunity for that child. This is now, we start in preschool, and we begin assessing them, and we begin ranking them, and we begin evaluating them, because everything is moving toward having them select a career. This is workforce development education, which is why you had the Workforce Development Data Quality Initiative. It's about creating a workforce. So it's not it's not education for your sake. That, I may decide to be a plumber. but I'm a plumber who can